when working with ex addicts, what is that aha moment that finally makes recovery and sobriety that much easier? It's the connecting of the dots, that big realization that changes the whole course and finally makes things start to click.
Yeah, such a good question, because it takes a while to get to figuring out what the answer to that question is. I've been in practice for, I don't know, almost just over 10 years now, and it's still a learning process. But I would say, and this is something I'm coming to even now, like I'm still developing this piece, but to sum it up and to put it in a one word, I guess, or one phrase would be really like developing your sense of self. A lot of times when we are high achievers or even low achievers with trauma, addiction, whatever it may be, we lose our sense of self. It's like we don't know who we are. We don't know what our values are, how to align to our values. We don't know how to self-express or how to just be aware of what's going on inside of us. And so for me, I have found that spending a good amount of time on not only understanding where your current sense of self is, but also understanding, because the way that I put it is, I feel like when it comes to addiction, sex addiction, or any addiction, including workaholism, for the high achievers, or food addiction, all that kind of stuff. I kind of put it in the realm of a surrogate sense of self, right? Like it's not really a true, authentic sense of self that we're expressing. We are, trying to live up to what we should be or what we were told to be growing up. And so addiction becomes our coping mechanism. Whatever the addiction is, even workaholism becomes the coping mechanism. It's the most acceptable way of escaping. It's the most acceptable way of avoiding ourselves.
Yeah, it's an addiction that nobody's gonna bust your balls for working and making a ton of money and getting but working your way to the top of the company, the firm, your industry. It's a societally acceptable addiction.
Absolutely, 100%. And I'm victim to that too. I've been part of that. I have strived to be, the best, or to, this is part of the process, right? Like what I'm doing right now is, I was telling you beforehand, I'm working on a book or working on these trainings, and that is my workaholism. I used to work, I started working at age 11, and by the time I was 18, I had 3 jobs. Why? Who knows? But that was part of because I just didn't know how to connect to myself. I didn't know who I was. I moved from England to America when I was a kid. And so, man, that was huge in not really understanding my sense of self. And so I developed this surrogate sense of self, of who I should be in this country. And so workaholism, achievement, success was part of my surrogate sense of self. So in recovery, in working on healing, not only myself, but my clients, is really what I now call working towards a renewed sense of self.
And one thing I would say too, for those listening, is this is, anyone listening to this is not the first time you have heard it. And it's, losing a sense of self. I think you'll hear therapists, especially in the addiction world, you'll hear people say this, and I think it doesn't land a lot of the time, because it's like, well, how could I lose myself, right? And it's this poorly defined thing that the therapist always says it like, oh, hey, here's the problem. It's supposed to be this profound moment, and as the addict, it's always like, well, so what? Like that doesn't help me. But what I would say for people listening, in terms of there's 2 aspects that I would clarify before we dive deeper into this discussion. Is Avi, you did a great job of of articulating how one loses themselves. I think for high achievers, we have a very active ego. The ego, if you look at the definition, it provides us with a sense of self and tests our reality. Now, a lot of people talk trash about the ego, but you could have picked an ego that was very advantageous and aligned with your purpose and could have totally helped you interact with the world. However, most of us, because we live in a capitalist society, the egos that are the most tempting, that appear to be the most advantageous, are really have not that much to do with being a fulfilled human as much as it has to do with being admired, being lusted after, being the best, being better than everyone else. And so, when she's speaking about losing your sense of self, it is a process that I think, especially in the Western world, happens really, really young. And I think, one of Michelle Mays, I don't know if you've read a ton of her stuff, but she's brilliant. I was talking to her last weekend, and she said something interesting. I said, I said something about recovery being returning to self. And she said, for high achievers, she's like, I don't know if that will land, because a lot of them have been shape-shifting for since a very, very, very early age to become great and achieve, that it's not so much a returning to self as much as it's a discovering of self. And I think, when you enter recovery, a lot of it is return to self. And for a lot of high achievers, I don't think they have any idea what they're returning to, because, it was either so young that they didn't know what they were doing, or it's just been so many decades that they're completely off track. So I guess what I would say is, for somebody who is shape-shifted for success, because it is a necessary, where do they start? I mean, how does somebody decipher between the aspects of themselves that are serving them and the ones that aren't?
Yeah. Just to kind of piggyback off what you were saying, that's why I call it a renewed sense of self,
I like
versus,
that.
so like, if there's no trauma in our childhood, if, we have a pretty good upbringing, nature versus nurture, all that stuff, I call that more of an innate sense of self, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just what we're born with. There isn't any damage to our sense of self.
When you meet someone like that, Indra, please send them my way, because I've still never met someone that
100%, right? It's like, people can talk about that, like, oh yeah, I've never had any trauma, I've never, I don't know what that means. I'm like, okay, cool.
Like, well, did your parents tell you to do things to be impressive, and then did you give up other things in favor of the things that your parents and mentors told you? That's why I hate the word trauma, because it's like, oh, that's not trauma, that's called good mentorship, good parenting, it's called being encouraging. It's like, well, I guess that depends on how many things they told you and how much you listen. But in my case, I gave up everything that made Roland and became what they told me to become.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And it's, you're right. That's why yes, I agree. The word trauma, not everybody connects with that. But if I were to go down that trauma lens, I would say it would all fit under covert trauma. Mm-hmm. Right. So even if there isn't any overt traumatic experiences, I think a lot of people experience those covert experiences. So if you don't want to use the word trauma, that's fine. We could just say covert experiences. Like, did your parents want you to be an athlete? Did your parents want you to be a lawyer? Right. And did they push you in that direction? And so that's losing that innate sense of self, and working towards now is you've lived probably a long life of this surrogate sense of self, or even, so the other realm is, I have the surrogate sense of self. And then I talk about either a fragile sense of self or an absent sense of self. When we enter into the realm of like personality disorders, so narcissistic personality disorder or borderline or even avoidant personality disorder, that I would say is more on the fragile or absent sense of self, meaning like we just don't have it, and it's everything. Our personality disorder is what's achieving it for us, whether it's grandiosity, whether it's, like you talked about the ego, just we inflate all of that to be able to get what we need to fulfill our sense of self. But you asked the question, what are some things?
How does one decipher? Because I think, and I see it all the time. High achievers are very resistant, because they go into therapy and it's like, they're talking to a therapist who makes in a year what they make in a month. And it's like this therapist is trying to say, hey, stop doing this. You care too much about this. And it's like, hey, you don't get it. This has made me successful. I have data. I have evidence that would suggest me showing up in this way has actually made has made my life better. And so there is some resistance there to what you're telling me is to drop all of this. And I really enjoy a lot of these things. And you're telling me to cut it out. Right. And depending on the person, they might rely on it more than others. So yeah, what do you, when we're returning to self, how do we know what to drop, and how do we know, what is not serving us and what is serving us, and how do we discern between the two?
Yeah, my first thought is like intention.
Mm.
Like, yes, you're making all of this money, you can travel, you can do all of these things with the life that you're living and the success that you have. But what's the intention behind it? Like, is it to just have all of these things and to yeah, sure, living comfortably with finances, 100%, great. Who wouldn't want that, right? But what's the intention behind it? And are you really happy, right? So then for me, one of the first things that I like to look at is values, like the value system. Are you living in alignment with your values, or are you living in misalignment with your values? When we're, active in our addictions, then we're mostly living in misalignment of our values, right? Talk about powerlessness, talk about unmanageability. That's the definition, right? And so really for me, it's, yeah, like, okay, if you're going to do this, because I'm the same way, I don't want to let go of these things. This is what is not only generating my income to be able to live, but I enjoy it. It's my passion, right? And so that's the other thing too, is taking a look at what your passion is. Do you really love what you're doing? And is your passions, can they be hobbies, or can they be the work that you're doing in your life? Right? A lot of people try to find jobs that is passionate for them so that they can keep doing what they're doing and make money out of it. So I would say really like assessing, again, the intention behind what you're doing.
Yeah, well, what you're talking about is, and I love this conversation, because I mean, isn't this the core of addiction? I mean, it's operating from a place, we can call it, I always call it kind of two different things, right? You can call it ego, and that's probably the most commonly used. I just don't like that word because it usually comes with a negative connotation. And I don't think it's necessarily a negative thing as much as it's just an idea of self. And if your idea of yourself is actually pretty darn good, then it wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing. But I think what you're talking about in terms of intent is, and I think this is hard for addicts, because if you identify more with this ego, this artificial self, the surrogate self, if that's your identity, then you will operate, and that's who you are convinced you are. And that's kind of the crazy thing about identities, is we actually pick them. And I know it doesn't feel like we pick them, but nobody told you were fat, smart. I mean, that was a decision that you made that morning. And then, you wake up every day as my favorite example is, I'm a 7 out of 10, right? It's like, I'm not a 10. I'm not one of them. No, but I'm pretty good. I'm definitely a lot better than most people, but no, I'm not a 10, right? So you live your life as a 7, right? And so you avoid things that a 7 would not be able to do, because it's like, that's not for me, right? I could never speak on stage. I'm a 7. But again, the irony is, because I identified as a 7 for a long time. And the irony was, when I started getting to know a lot of the people on stage, the authors of all the books, they're just regular people. And what I realized, the only difference between them and everyone else is they decided that they were a 10. And so then they lived like a 10. And so I think what you're speaking of in terms of intent is, am I serving the surrogate self, or am I doing this from for lack of a better word, a divine place of, I'm doing this because I experience joy. I don't know why. I don't care to know why, because it just feels like the right thing to do, versus, oh, I like the stories that this validates about me. And for the, because we're speaking about sex addiction in particular, I think one of the things that makes process addiction so stinking hard to overcome, is that they rest right next to processes that are actually human. We do want to be wanted, desired, lusted after. But I think what you're speaking of is, which of the two are you playing for? Because the divine self wants, connection, meaningful connection. It wants to be appreciated for their intellect. It wants to be appreciated for their ability to solve problems. And when we start playing for ego, right, it's they just want attention, right? So, I'll buy this $200,000 car and now everybody will look at me. But I think the biggest difference, I think if someone was in my, from my work, when I'm interacting with these men, I think the biggest difference is when you come home and you pull into the garage and you turn off the car, when no one's actively looking at you, what's the feeling then? Because if the feeling is, oh my gosh, I need to go down and drive a couple times around Main Street, that's kind of the first indicator of, are you playing for dopamine, or are you playing for joy at this point? Because if you get home and you shut the garage and all you want to do is go back to being seen, or find another way to be seen, you got to ask yourself, is this an addiction, or is this for me? Right.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So evaluate that, right? Evaluate these behaviors that are fueling that identity that you are good with, whether it's a surrogate one or what you are calling maybe your renewed identity, but evaluate that. That's a great example, right? Because then my other little antidote, I guess, is working on really like how to be alone, and really understanding the art of being alone. And yeah, you said it, right? Like, what is it when you close the garage door and you go home and you sit on the couch? Now what, right? Do you know how to be with yourself? The ultimate thing with addiction and with high achievement and success is, to me, is avoidance, right? I'm sure that's not a new concept to any of us probably, but what are we avoiding, right? So really exploring that. And oftentimes it is like, who am I? What are my emotions? What are my beliefs? What are my values, my morals? If I were to like just show up and like ask you who you are, the amount of times that I've done that with a client, like, who are you? Tell me who you are. Stumped, silence. And I sit there and I will wait and I will just stare at them. I'm like, oh, I got time. Like, whenever you're ready, just tell me who are you? What makes you you? And it takes them a long time. But then if I ask them the question, well, where do you mess up a lot, or where do you struggle? Easy, right? Boom, boom, boom. They're giving me all of these answers. And so I try to show them like, wow, I asked you this question first. Silence, at least for a solid minute. Silence. But then when we talk about this, cool, you've got all of these answers for days, right? So help me understand why this is so difficult to answer this question. And so for me, like in the beginning of therapy is really figuring out how to be with yourself, listening to, I do a lot of somatic experiencing type of work. So that's working with the body, but also recognizing, okay, when I'm alone at home, what comes up for me, not only mentally in my head, right? As addicts and as high achievers, but very intellectuall, very smart, right? That's that ego driven part that I'll read all night because I'm researching this topic. I'll research online all night because I want to be proficient in this one thing, right? But like, take that away. Why are you doing that? What's the intent of that? Take it away though. Sit with yourself. Just sit on the couch. Don't put the TV on. Sit there. What comes up for you? How do you evaluate that? Maybe journal. There's so much research behind meditation. And that's also linked with the self concept too. Meditation is part of you exploring, expanding, developing, growing your sense of self. So again, if you're not meditating, please add that to your daily occurrence.
Well, what you're talking about is, and I always like to rephrase it because I think some people, they take it so literally, like, oh, how could writing in a book, in third person help me? How could sitting in our spare bedroom with the lights off for 15 minutes breathing help me? I always like to rephrase it and pull kind of the label of journaling off of it, pull the label of meditation off of it. And I just say, hey, listen, what all these exercises are doing are trying to show you that you do in fact have attention, and that you can place it places. And I think without those, to your point, without those exercises, I agree with you. Journaling is a staple. I attribute journaling. I've paid a lot of people a lot of money to help me and fix me. And journaling is still probably responsible for 85% of the breakthroughs. Now, I took my interactions with my therapist, my CSATs, and all these individuals and used that fuel to journal, right? So they kind of gave me these little nuggets, and then I would journal about them. But what you're saying is really important. I think the challenge with this with this concept of a renewed self, of getting just discerning between what's actually you and what isn't you. I think that whole journey can't begin without what you're saying, which is you need to really be sold on the idea that there is a difference between the two. And because if you don't really believe that there is a authentic self in you that actually it doesn't need to do anything to get better, that it's actually designed perfectly to carry out its perfect purpose with its unique abilities as is. If you're not sold on that concept, then it's almost like you're more sold on the surrogate self. And so it's, recovery can't even begin, because it's like you're almost not interested in changing, if that makes sense. And they would always deny this. I mean, when I can remember when I was this person and I was being told to change it, and I was like, no, this is me. This is me. You see these, like, this is me. This is good stuff. I'm embarrassed to even say it now, because I think back to the moment. I must imagine what the therapist was thinking on the other side, which is like, yeah, those are a bunch of ideas. And yes, in theory, in this world, looking that way, having a bank account like that and a vehicle like that and a house like that or multiple homes like that, yes, that does tend to get attention in the world that we live in. And there's a difference between the two. Being good at running, because what you were describing was, I'll read all night and I'll be researching something really, really important to me. Process addictions. It's funny that a lot of people don't like the phrase sex addiction, and I'm starting to become less and less a fan of it as well, because it's like, to just grab those particular genre of neurons and call them a problem. I'm like, yeah, but like, what about like obsessively reading at night to get better, right? What about like checking your stocks like 7 times a day, as if like you opening your app has some sort of influence over whether they're going to go up and down? It's always funny that we grab this genre of brain processes and say, oh, you're sick and you need to change them, when it's like, man, there's a lot of scrolling on you name it going on. What about those process addictions? And then important, back to your point, what is it you don't want to see? You're talking about this art of being in a room alone. That's how you have a process addiction, is what happens when you can't exercise any of your processes and you're actually just sitting there. Talk to us about that lesson, because I think there's a lesson there when you need to run a brain process in order to sit in a dark room.
Yeah. Again, I think intentionally sitting in a dark room, it doesn't have to be dark, but in a room,
a light room. Yeah.
A room, you can have light. You could be out in the grass. You could be wherever.
It could be 10 a.m. Yes. I think everyone always envisions like this, like loner whose family has left them. Yeah. Your family's fine. They're at school and your wife's at work and it's 10:30. Okay.
Yeah. And again, it doesn't have to be an hour. Even if you just start with 5 minutes, 10 minutes, like, okay, intentionally, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to do absolutely nothing. I'm just going to maybe just be aware of my thoughts for a moment. I'm not going to lean into it. I'm not going to, I'm just going to just watch them float by. I'm just going to sit here. I'm going to feel what's going on in my body for a second. Oh, I'm noticing that I have the urge to get up and get my laptop. I'm noticing I have the urge to look at my phone. It just lit up, right? Like, so your eyes will go there. But then, so like 10 minutes, just practicing that will start really challenging those neural pathways.
I need to interrupt you here because I think that you're saying 10 minutes like it's not a lot of time. I just read, and for the guys listening to this, they've seen it, so it's not like this obscure fact. But when you go to a football game or a stadium and you go into the men's room, they said that, and this is crazy, 90% of the men in the stalls have one hand on their phone and the other, where. And my point of that example is they can't even sit with themselves for the 92 seconds that it takes to pee. And so I just wanted to interrupt you and say, the impulse here is 10 minutes will be a stretch. For
it's
sure.
Absolutely. That's why I say 5 minutes. If you can manage 5, cool. Bump it up to 10, bump that up to 15, right? So it's a practice. It's building it up. But I 100% agree. When was the last time you went to the bathroom at home or even at work without your phone? Without scrolling on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, Reddit, right?
For 90 seconds while you're trying to maximize productivity, when reality you're actually engaging in brain processes to minimize the amount of time you're actually alive.
Yeah, exactly. So again, challenge that, work on that, right?
And just so everybody listening can understand why we're talking about this, because I think some people listen to all these recordings that I do, and they wonder, man, is this even a sex addiction recording? Like, what's going on? Why are they not talking about sex addiction? Like, what's happening here? I'm trying to recover. Just so everybody knows, I mean, really, addiction is quite simple, right? You have either unmet needs or you're experiencing emotions that you don't want to feel. I mean, it's one of the two. And the interesting thing I think about sex addiction is you get a really healthy dose of both. I think in the society that we live in, especially amongst successful male culture, the sex has been so infused with esteem and recognition, with connection and belonging and being a part of a social status. If I can get this category of women to sleep with me, then I will know that I am a man. I must be a man in this category. Or, if I can have these sort of sexual experiences, and it's because of money, then I know that I am one of the guys who's able to, we've linked getting our unmet needs met with sex. And then also, a lot of people want to know, a lot of men can't figure out why they engage in chat sites, emotional affairs when they have no intention of leaving their wives. It's because I don't know of a bigger and more steady dopamine hit than an emotional affair. I mean, it's on your mind when you're texting them. It's on your mind when you're not texting them. You're thinking, oh, is she going to send me a picture? Oh, I wonder how she would say to this. It's emotional affairs. If you want an escape, they're, in my opinion, I don't know if there's a better escape from your 18-hour day than running a taboo, against the rules emotional affair. And so the reason, I just wanted to clarify, the reason that we're talking about getting needs met and we're talking about really dealing with emotions is addiction. That's the whole reason addiction's there. I mean, and again, people say, well, Roland, how do I not get my needs met? I'm successful. I do this. We go on all these vacations. Again, are those your needs or are these fabricated needs? Right? Because if you're constantly tending to your fabricated needs and ignoring your authentic needs, you're going to need a boatload of addictions to deal with that. Absolutely. I would say there's nothing. We talk about the 3 most unpleasant feelings that a high achiever can feel: boredom, lack of direction, and a sense of futility. And if your needs are unmet and you are chronically ignoring the emotions in you of telling you, hey, I am not fulfilled, you're going to need a sex addiction and more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as you were talking about the emotional affair, I was thinking of the fantasy part, right?
Mm-hmm.
The fantasy. I mean, so one of the other things I specialize in is love addiction and love avoidance as well. And I work with ITAP, which is the company, the training institute that trains all of the CSATs and the CPTTs and all the other stuff when it comes to sex addiction. And, we're really expanding into the love addiction realm too. But there's so many people out there that you also mentioned, like the term sex addiction or love addiction. Like Yeah, I've got some feelings about that too, right? But again, I agree. It's this neural pathway. It's this dopamine, these neural chemicals that are just being captured as a certain process, and that it becomes unmanageable. We don't know how to manage those surges of neurochemicals in our brain. But yeah, so working with, even love addicts, a big piece for love addiction is the fantasy. That is their drug of choice. Not only the fantasy, but also the time that's spent with that partner, their object, right? So sex addiction too, that is, that's part of that process, is imagining, okay, I'm going to get my needs met. And then that happens, right? That's the beauty of the brain, is just imagining this stuff.
Yeah.
I get the hit. I get the hit that I need. And there's so much science behind the ritual of an addiction, right? Whether it's a
it feels good. I mean, that's the thing. Everybody, for the record straight, every addict listening to this, it feels great. Javier and I are not trying to take that from you. It feels fantastic. That's why you do it.
Right. Exactly. There's a reason why we're doing it. It feels good. It's so fascinating, because it's like when we get the feel good emotions and sensations, we know how to talk about that. Oh, I feel so good. I feel so light. I feel so pumped. I feel great, right? I'm so excited. I'm smiling. Like, you can describe what you're experiencing. But then when we talk about depression, sadness, avoidance, pulling away from everything that you've been doing in your addiction, well, I don't know what I feel. I'm numb. I don't know. So again, a huge discrepancy in what happens in the process of now exploring your sense of self when you're by yourself. Or, the other thing I was thinking about is, have you heard of other esteem versus self-esteem?
Other esteem? No, I have not.
So this is Pia Melody's model. So a part of, sex addiction, any addiction, as well as workaholism and high achievement, as well, is we bank our esteem on other things. Versus generating self-esteem within ourselves, right? So, you talked about the car, the job, the woman, the nights that you go out, the outfits, the gym, right? All of these things are very external to you. So if you lose any one of those things, you lose a part of yourself, your surrogate self, because that's what you've put together to say, look at me, I'm amazing.
Yeah, I mean, anybody who's gone through a bankruptcy, which is probably somebody listening to this when they were on top of the world, they know what we're talking about. It's the biggest piece of humble pie. That the only thing bigger than a bankruptcy of humble pie is getting discovered in your sex addiction. That's probably that's like two pies worth of humble pie. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And so the other esteem is fueling so much for us. Think about an athlete who breaks their ankle and they're no longer able to play basketball or throw the ball, whatever it might be. They've just lost a huge chunk of their esteem. So with that comes grief, right? Now we're having to grieve this part of myself that I built, that I developed, that I did, right? And I'm grieving that now. And so that leads into addictive processes. So again, the idea of the other esteem, it's cool. It's great. We get to choose it. We get to pick it. We get to develop it. But it's so risky because it might not be there every day. It might not last 100% until the day you die. So therefore, we need to flip that, right? We need to have internal, innate sense of self and self-esteem where I generate it. I have full control then of my self-esteem. I don't need anybody or anything else to tell me I'm good, to tell me I'm amazing, that I'm successful, that I've got all this. I don't need that then, right? It's way more reliable when it's coming within myself.
Yeah, this is something we talk about a ton in our groups, which is the difference between, because here's the thing, as high achievers, you do need to perform. The performance, you're putting on that show, it can and often is the reason for the double life. But let's be real, the performance is critical to success in the professional world. People want you to look a certain way, and your ability to look the way that they want you to look will make you more successful. If you only look the way that you want to look and you don't care about the way that anyone else cares about what you look, that's cool for true self-esteem. But again, business, your business may not do as well because society might not be ready for someone who looks like that yet, depending on what it is that we're talking about. So it's this difference between putting the Rolex on because you know that the room you're walking into, they care about that, but also you secretly knowing that I'm not a better person because I'm putting on this $38,000 watch. It is a tool. It is a strategy in this very material capitalistic society that we live in. So yeah, right. Yeah, you put it on so that you can influence people in that room, because they right now consider that a qualifier. I mean, the truth is a lot of the opportunities I have are because I have a ton of money, and I'm sad that that's the case, because I have met people who are more talented than me, who don't have the money that I have, and no one listens to them because it is just this measure. So what Javi's talking about here is you can keep your skill set, I say for high achievers is their ability to shapeshift, and it's the reason they're so stinking successful is they can meet people where they are. The best therapists, in my opinion, do this as well too. They come in the office and they shapeshift for the client, and then they go home their authentic selves. And anybody who says, oh, well, Roland, how do I do this? Or that sounds complicated, or maybe they're not buying into it. If you have kids, I can promise you that you do this, because you do not speak to your 4-year-old the same way you speak to your 12-year-old, the same way you speak to your wife. That is the shape shifting that we're talking about. You are meeting them where they are so that you can give them what you need. And again, what I'm not telling anyone to sell out, because there is a moment where you could compromise your value. Sex addiction is a great example of this. You could sell out on your values for this other thing. And, that I would say is, more of the definition of the double life. But, mastering the skill, Javi and I are not asking you to drop everything that has made you successful. What we're asking for you is to drive a wedge in between those two and have some boundaries of when you turn it on, that you're not, I like that other self concept, right? That when you put the Rolex on, what's the intent behind it? And do you now, when you have it on, do you now walk around the world with this inflated sense of self? Are you trying to make sure, you're trying to make sure that everyone knows you're better than them? Or are you genuinely putting it on because, hey, I'm going to do this TED Talk today, and the majority of the audience will expect me to look a certain way? But that's that difference between I'm not a better person because of this, and then if I lost the watch and I had to sell it because of my financial hardship, I'm also not a worse person because of that. But I like that concept. So there's a question I had for you then. What, when someone recognizes that if they're a high achiever and they are trying to change their mind, how do we do this? Because I find that high achievers are a bit resistant in terms of the guides they're going to choose. And so I think a lot of the times, I've heard men say this all the time, hey, I'm really ready to change. I just don't think my therapist can help me because it seems like I'm in this washing machine over and over again. Talk to us about that, because I know this. It's just Patrick Carnes talks about it. It's in every sex addiction book out there. There's this, between 9 and 12 months in recovery where they're in this washing machine, and it's just like trauma tools. But they're still not sober minded. They might not be acting out, but they're still not sober minded. Talk to us about the washing machine. How does somebody get the hell out of that thing? And because you know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah. The first thing that pops up for me is it's like the narrative, right? The narrative that you're living by. Usually I tell my clients, what's the manual that you were given from your parents, from their parents, so generationally? What was the manual that you were given? How to function in life? So usually that manual is probably not the most healthiest, right? That's probably what has fueled the sex addiction. You have to be the best. You have to be perfect. You have to be, you have to go above and beyond. You have to care for everybody. You have to, right, finish school. You have to make X amount of money, right? That's the manual that you're living by, which is cool and dandy, right? It's got you to this point. It's got its relevancy. But now that you're at this point in your life, is it still true for you? So that then leads me to your values. Do you know what your values are? If I were to ask you in a session or even just in conversation, what are your values? But also really assessing and understanding your values in different areas of your life. So personal values. So when you're by yourself, what are your values when it's just you? If you are in a marriage, What are your values in that marriage? If you are a parent, what are your values as being a parent? What about work? What about your social life? What, right? So if you really evaluate each of these values, are you living in congruence and in alignment with that? So to me, that's all cognitively based. It's all in the head, and that I believe too will be your exit out of the washing machine, because the washing, again, it's rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat.
I love that you said that. The thing that hit me was because I was in the washing machine in recovery, and I don't think it's, I mean, it's in every single book for a reason. I think there is this moment, and I think you nailed it. You said it really, really well. It's what is your idea of recovery? Because I think initially it is very rigid. You have no idea what you're doing. Most sex addicts, a lot of high achievers, the reason they chose sex over substances was they needed to look good, care for their body, and they needed to be able to hide it. And sex is a perfect one that you can try to keep hidden for as long as possible. And so a lot of them don't have experience with addiction. I think you nailed it. You have to almost reevaluate your definition of recovery and sobriety and what it is that you're doing. Because I think, to your point, when you're in the washing machine, I don't think it's your therapist's fault. I don't think it's Patrick Carnes' fault in the books. I think that you have committed to an idea of what you need to be doing, and you're stuck in the washing machine because you have created this very rigid idea of sobriety and recovery, and now you're waiting for the secret answer. And that 9 months, you start to realize there is no secret answer to recovery. I like the way you worded that. I do. I think that is the problem with the washing machine. Is it's like, hey, I'm making my calls to the guys in group. I've been to the intensive. I go to SA or SAA, twice a week. I've got my therapist appointment, and it's like I'm doing the thing, and I'm kind of like frozen in this. I'm not acting out, but I'm also not recovered, and my marriage is still a disaster. And that's that washing machine. But I think you worded it really nicely. So what beliefs do they have to change about what's their idea of recovery? Like, how do they reframe this to feel like they're still making progress, or at least that there's like progress to make? What's wrong with the way they're approaching it?
Well, real quick too, what I heard you say too is, they're doing all the things, they're going to their meetings, and that's the action, right? Action is a very big percentage of recovery. Just do the things and it will come, right? Recovery will come. Just get out there, connect, do the work, right? But if it's not in alignment with the way that you're thinking about all of this, again, the intention piece, sure. Are you only going to meetings because your therapist said you have to go to meetings? Or are you going to meetings because you genuinely want to connect with other sex addicts or other people who are high achievers and to connect with your emotions? What is the intention of you doing the stuff? Are you just doing it because your wife said so? Because you don't want to get divorced? What's the intention, right? Then the other thing I was going to say too is I created like 12 steps to a renewed sense of self. I have a little image over here. I don't know if I'll show real quick. It's like
yeah, please. If you could email that to me, my team and I can put it on the show. I think that'd be helpful.
And it's like it's my little, to go along with sex addiction and the recovery work you're doing. There's 12 steps here as well to your renewed sense of self. So for me, it kind of builds on each other, but it's also flexible. So like the first one I have is self-awareness, right? And I've created with it. So like self-awareness is here at the top, but then I've got a message here. It's an affirmation, you could call it, right? So simply, I am committed to increasing my self-awareness. And then actually practicing that again with intention. I'm going to sit here and I'm going to sit here for 5 minutes while I take a dump, and I'm going to focus on my self-awareness, right?
You said, I love what you're saying. You're saying something my wife said to me about 4 months into recovery. She came in and I was so pissed when she said it. She goes, Roland, I don't feel like you're trying very hard. And I was so mad because at the time I was going to hella meetings. I signed up for every freaking thing you can. But you know what she said was exactly what you're doing there was, as a high achiever, she knows what I'm capable of. And she's like, yeah, I've seen you go all in before, and this is not going all in. And it's what you're saying is almost, I hope you send that to me, because what you're saying is yeah, are you essentially, you know, I'll say it more gruff than you said it is. Yeah. If you think are you really going all in? Like, are you really, really going all in? I think that's what kind of your little checklist is there is, these are the 12 steps to going all in.
Yeah, exactly. And again, it's the intention part of all of it. Are you
Mhm.
really doing this for you, for me, for
Mhm.
us, the family? Or are you just doing this because you got caught and you don't want to be the bad guy,
Mhm.
right? You don't want your colleagues, your high achieving friends to think
You want
less
it to
of
go away.
you. Right.
You want it to go away, right? And it's and I love that. I think you nailed it. It's when in my group, so I interview every single person who comes into our group, and I interview myself. You know, everyone's always like, you should hire an appointment setter. But the reason I interview myself is because I want to determine exactly what you just said.
Right.
Are you trying to get this out of your life so you can just like put it behind you? Or do you truly recognize that there are a series of brain processes here that even if you kick this addiction, it's just going to turn into something else. You're going to have to triple down on your work. You're going to have to triple down on your speaking engagements. You're going to have, you're going to have this withdrawal of attention and admiration or dopamine, and you're going to need to get it from somewhere else. And it's the people who really understand, hey, I need to change the way I think about myself and what I'm up to, because if it's not this addiction, it's going to be something else. And I do believe, at least in my personal experience, I think you really do need peer support to be able to do that. I really do. I think in a isolated container, your couple CSAT, your CSAT, and doing a lot of these workbooks, listening to podcasts, listening to books, this is all great in getting resourceful. But, there's an aspect of like regular ass human life that if it stays in this like sex addiction recovery container, sometimes that carryover into like, what's this mean really? That's tough. And I think that's where the peer support groups really shine is, there's a chapter in my book called Your Recovery is Not a Burden. And it's my favorite chapter because it's like, listen, for the guys in our group, this was the best thing that ever happened to them. They hate saying that around their wife or in front of their wife because obviously it's the entire exact opposite for her. But I mean, a lot of these addicts, they'll double their income, triple their income. They'll engage in this abandoning the surrogate self. I mean, they needed something like this to happen for them to do it, and without this, they would have died never knowing their true self. And what a shame that would be.
Yeah. Yeah. And my thought too is like, if you think that you're successful now and you're making all of this income, you've got all of these speaking gigs, you got all these things going on for you, and you're successful, right? You're doing it. You intentionally are working towards your success, and you have it right now. But like, imagine actually doing this intentional work with your sense of self. How much more success could you gain then, right? If you're really your authentic self and you're showing up that way in all of your professional engagements at work, with your clients, colleagues, I feel like you could go even further than where you're probably currently at right now. Even if you're stagnant or if you're like thriving, cool, that's great. But I think this could also just douse a little bit more oomph, a little bit more juice into propelling even further, right? Like imagine that.
Oh yeah. The fulfillment. It's when you think that version of success is fulfillment, I can assure you it's not. But yeah, what you're saying is have both. We're not asking you to give up the vacations, the money. Actually, you said quite the opposite. You didn't say not only give it up. You said you said, you think you're successful now, right? Just wait until you're a fulfilled person on stage. Wait till you're a fulfilled person who is giving the presentation. I always tell people when you put the 10s next to the 7s, or the 7 who's pretending to be a 10 in the room, the 10 who identifies as a 10 out of 10 closes the deal every single time. I call them the effortless entrepreneurs. They just crush it without any effort. And it's exactly what you said. It's because there is no double life. It is a single fulfilled existence where they don't have to run a program. Because anytime you're running programs, you're kind of not there. You're kind of an AI, if you will. You're like 40% there, but then 60% of your brain's running a program. Whereas, yeah, when you run in to the room and all you have to do is be yourself and you can be 100%
So
there.
much easier.
Oh,
Yes.
I mean, what it just, you know, because I always tell everybody, you know, who gives you money? Humans. And humans love to be in the room with other humans, not
Yes.
people pretending to be something. And authenticity requires no preparation, and it gives people. Yeah, I'll say this too, and I want you to respond to this as our last thing because I think this is huge. You know what your wife wants? To be with your authentic self. It's like everyone's always like, oh, how do I get her trust back? And oh, I'm going to sign up for this thing. I'm going to go to this intensive and I'll check myself into this and then she'll forgive me. I will tell you what, they're looking, you've done the unthinkable really at this point. I mean, you've really done, there's nothing worse you could do to her. And they're looking really for, they're looking for one, in my opinion, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. They're looking for one thing only. And that is the feeling that cannot be artificially fabricated. It's the feeling that you get with somebody who's not running any programs. They're just there as their self, and they have no idea if that's going to be enough or not, but they are done running the programs and they're just there with you. That'll be the day that your marriage will get back to normal.
100%. Be real, right? Just be you, be real. It doesn't take effort. It doesn't take, okay, let me take that back. It does take a little effort because if you don't know how to be the real you, then you got to do this work, right? This renewed sense of self stuff.
Yeah, and it will be the hardest. I won't even bullshit around.
Yeah.
Becoming your authentic, it's the hardest thing I've ever done. It's harder than any of the businesses I've grown. It's harder than, that was the hardest work. So yeah, we're not going to bullshit you there. It's a discovering self when you don't know what yourself is. You know, I will not say it's easy. Maybe I won't say it's hard, but certainly not easy.
Yeah, it's like going to a university that you didn't know that you signed up for and you don't know what the classes mean, but you have to complete all the assignments.
Yeah, perfect. Oh my gosh. I am going to directly quote you on that. I love that description. That is, it couldn't exactly. So it's not like we're saying it's hard. It's just that you have no effing clue what's going on, but to trust it and to lean in and go as hard as you possibly can. Right. I love that.
Every day to that classroom, sit down, even if it's 5 minutes, even if it's 10, right? Just show up every day, go to that classroom and figure it out. Figure out whatever the lesson is in that moment.
You're worth it and your wife's worth it. That's what I always say. I mean, what more evidence do you need? Like, stop asking questions. This has been proven. These things have proven to work. Peer support, therapy, acceptance, these things work. Just show up and do it. You're worth it and your wife's worth it. Avi, where are you licensed and how does somebody work with you?
Absolutely. I am licensed in Arizona and Florida. I am doing private practice part-time with the Trauma Healing Center in Scottsdale, Arizona. And then I work full-time with ITAP, which is, like I mentioned, the creators. And I do the CSAC curriculum and develop it and add to it. So I'm always doing my research too, to do that. And so you can also find me at itap.com. As well. We've got tons of trainings for therapists, but all the workbooks that you guys are working on, the recovery, facing the shadow, recovery zone 1, 2, facing heartbreak, that's all from ITAP. So that's where you can find me.
Yes, she's you're right. You're in the weeds of it, of the stuff that works, Yep. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much. This was such a fun conversation. I love your energy. We'll have to do this again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Roland.
Yeah.